I spend my academic life researching the evolution of the life sciences industry and pontificating about where it's headed. When I talk to industry leaders about how I expect the industry to change, the question I'm asked is always the same. When will we see these predicted changes happen? And my answer is always the same. Don't worry, by the time you see the changes, it will be too late for you to do anything about them. Now, forgive the slightly sarcastic and unhelpful answer, but I do have an excuse. You see, from an academic's perspective, this question commits a cardinal sin, the sin of begging the question. That is, the question contains an implicit premise that directly entails the answer. To be precise, this question assumes that the industry is changing at a steady pace so that, within a margin of error, we can predict what it will look like at a given future date. But who says change has to be steady? In fact, in my research area of evolutionary theory applied to industries, the opposite is likely to be true. Allow me to elaborate for a moment before I get to what this means in practice. In evolutionary biology, the patchy fossil record prompted Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould to coin the phrase punctuated equilibrium, meaning long periods of stasis interrupted by episodes of rapid change. This seems to be an important property of complex adaptive systems, of which both biological systems and industries like life sciences are examples. What this means is that we shouldn't expect the life science industry to change gradually at a predictable pace. Instead, we should expect it to change little or only slowly over relatively long periods, and then suddenly experience spurts of quite fundamental change, probably triggered by an event in the social or technological environment with which it co-evolves. Before you dismiss this as the ramblings of an academic, just take a peek at our industry's history. The latter half of the 19th century and the early years of the 20th saw just such a spurt as the 600-year-old apothecary business model was replaced by what we now call research-based companies and OTC companies. Smaller but still dramatic changes happened after the therapeutic revolution just after World War II, and the regulatory changes in the 60s and the advent of generics in the 1980s. Each of these episodes were triggered by external factors in either technology or legislation or healthcare systems or similar. So if you're looking for current examples of triggers to dramatic industry change, you could look at, for instance, health technology assessment or the internet or globalization. The point is that a time-travelling version of me might well have predicted those industry changes in advance, but it would have been near impossible to predict exactly when and how fast those changes would have occurred. As Niels Bohr famously said, predictions are dangerous, especially those about the future. You might also have added that predicting the timing of change in a complex adaptive system that experiences punctuated equilibrium is even more dangerous and not a little naive. We can dare to predict how the industry will evolve, but not the timing of those changes. Does that mean that we should just sit back, wait, and then adapt to the changes as we see them? Well, no. In fact, if we use that 19th century birth of the research-based industry as an example, we can see that it was those companies that anticipated and preempted change that were the most successful. That's where names like Bayer and Johnson & Johnson and Merck and GSK all come from. And there are two reasons that anticipators win over reactors in that survival stakes game. The first and most obvious one is that organisational change takes time, especially in our industry, and so anticipators win a sustainable lead. For example, when Burroughs Wellcome anticipated change by being the first companies to do animal studies outside of a university, they seized a head start that eventually led to GSK. The second and less obvious reason is that anticipators lead and shape change, so they build their own future in effect. When Roche acquired Boehringer Mannheim in 1997, they shaped the diagnostic therapeutic future of what we now call stratified medicine. So history tells us that anticipators are likely to be the ones that are the future of the industry. And right now we can see examples of anticipation happening. So for example, what Merck is doing in telemedicine, or those companies that are working in immune oncology. And we can also examples of the opposite, which is almost every time you hear the phrase industry best practice. So I promised you a practical implication, so here it is for the theory of punctuated equilibrium. Anticipate how the industry will evolve and proactively adapt to it, Because if you wait to react, then you will go the way of the apothecaries. Oh, and one other thing. If you beg the question with an academic, you should expect a sarcastic answer.